back. Hope you're doing well. I'm going to do some mandolin work today. Long-time viewers, and I mean like really long time, might actually remember this one from a video I made, it's got to be 8 years ago now, maybe? When I made this armrest. Still on there, providing rest. Looking good. This is Sean Trotters, the composer of the music at the beginning of my videos. I've talked about him recently. Anyway, he's back from Nova Scotia for a couple of weeks, and he wants me to get this thing in order because it's time for a partial refret. Sean, of course, plays a lot. And if you do that on a mandolin, it's quite easy to dig some deep grooves into the frets. Maybe a little quicker than on your average guitar, too. This is a Gibson F9 from, I think, 2008, if I'm reading the serial number correctly, which is Gibson's attempt to make an F5 slightly more affordable by using a satin finish and less ornate binding. You got one strip on the front and none on the back. Other than that, it's pretty much your classic F5 design. The setup looks good, hasn't changed very much over the years. 3/64ths on both bass and treble. Some people would consider that pretty low. Remember about 10 years ago I had to cut a little piece off the landing areas on the bottom of the bridge here to get it down a bit more. It seems to be doing well for itself. Looking at the fretware, it's in the places you would expect it to be. Let's see, in frets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The ones higher up the board I can get away with just dressing and recrowning. This is, of course, vintage size wire. Pretty diminutive. Not a whole lot of height. Definitely not a whole lot of width. There's a pencil mark on the bottom of the bridge saying 308. It's my collection of seldom used wires. I know I got some Mando wire in here somewhere. There it is. Mando. Yeah, it's funny. I think about the last 5 mandolin refrets I've done, people have wanted to go to a larger size wire. Like a small guitar wire, basically. These are about 50 thousandths wide. I'm betting they're around 35 thousandths tall. 30 thousandths tall. So that's what I got. I got the right stuff, which is nice. Another refret video? Man, you do those all the time, man. Well, yeah, of course. Want to watch someone who does guitar repair? It's what we do. Whole lot of refrets. It's like anything else. You know, they tend to come in waves, right? And it seems like really, a lot of people aren't too concerned about the jobs I show myself doing. They kind of want to hang out and just see me do them. Like there's a well-respected builder down in Virginia named Wayne Henderson. He's like a real rural folk superstar. And he's renowned for building fantastic flat tops with a bunch of local guys who just hang out in his shop and drink beer and shoot the breeze. You know, Wayne's guitars sell for $20,000 or $30,000 a piece, and he makes them in front of an audience, you know, while chatting. So, you know, it's kind of fun to have people watch you, and also a bit nerve-wracking. My soldering iron is heating up. Why are satin finishes less expensive? Well, that's an industry secret there, buddy. Some people think that it's because there's less finish on there. No, it's about the same amount. The coating thickness is the same. And it's applied in very much the same way. But this has got what's called a flattening agent added to it. So it just naturally disperses light rather than reflecting it back towards your eye. The top coat on these has to be applied perfectly for it to look good. But there is, you know, basically an hour's worth of labor that's saved by not having to sand it and buff it out. There's probably about the same amount saved by, you know, dispensing with the binding on the back and the purfling, the multiple fine line strips that you see on the fancy models. The thing with satin finishes is they do eventually get shiny in the areas where you rub up against them. How can you prevent that? Well, you can't. Not really. Can you make it unshiny again? Kind of. You can use a Scotch-Brite style sanding pad to add some surface texture. It won't look exactly the same as the unhandled areas, but it won't be as shiny. Really, you should just live with it. Let it get shiny, let it develop the patina that it's going to get. Recently, I've been really fascinated by the way British people change the TH sound in phrases like "thank you for your service" to an F sound. I'm trying to incorporate that into my daily life. This little tiny score mark here on either side of the fret prevents further split out when I remove them. It also cuts through the little bit of grunge that's tied up against the corner there. How long should a set of frets last? These have been on there for, 16 years? It seems about normal for average players. Again, there are some people who really dig in deep and they can go through a set in 5 years. And there's others who, for whatever reason, just put no wear on their frets at all. Ebony is harder and more chippy than rosewood. And sometimes it can be useful to use one of these sort of protectors. They don't work great on mandolin wire, as you can see here, because they're just about as tall as the wire is, and the slot in them is about as wide as the wire itself. But it does help to keep from marring up the fingerboard. And it provides a little bit of downward pressure in the area that's lifting up. Main thing is just to go slow and don't have any, quick jerky movements. Came out clean and it came out creeping. My wife is the only one who's going to laugh at that. Just a swipe or two of some 1200 grit here, just to clean up the board a bit, get rid of some of the grunge. It's in good shape otherwise. And clean out the fret slots. Use this little Stumac tool to see if the frets are deep enough. I bet you they will be. Yeah, not a whole lot of extra depth, which is a good thing. I will probably just clean them out a bit with my scratch tool here, which is the same width as a fret slot. It's 22 thousandths of an inch wide, which is the width of the slot. And it's basically like a single sawtooth, really, kind of hook-shaped. And with this I can deepen a slot a few thousandths of an inch, just to get rid of any glue that might be in the bottom, square up the side walls. It's really handy in times where you've got a bound fretboard and you can't put the standard fret saw through the board. Anytime I'm doing this kind of stuff, I work from the edge of the board into center. I don't come out the other side, because these edges here are very fragile, and any kind of leverage one way or the other and they'll want to chip off, which is unsightly and expensive for me because it wastes my time having to fix them. So I'll do one side, turn the mandolin over, do the other side. Always take the triangular file and do that one little pass just to break the sharp corner. It's amazing how much easier the frets go in if you do this. And also how much cleaner they come out in the future if you have to. Fish glue, because it gets really hard and crispy. And if you're one of the people who believes there's a tremendous amount of string energy which needs to get passed through the fret, into the fretboard, down the neck, into the body, and eventually out of the instrument as sound waves, this should do that in a more efficient manner. I'll snip off the protruding ends, file them flush, being very careful. Then level the tops. These are going to end up about 0.02 higher than the frets farther down the board. I'll do some recrowning with the 3-cornered file. Then polishing, polishing, polishing. I'll carefully round over the ends. Now then, Sean has been using an LR Baggs radius pickup with good success for some time. This is what they describe as a magnetically damped accelerometer. It picks up the soundboard vibrations and makes the music go. The thing is, it clips on with the sensor adhered to the exterior of the soundboard using putty and this clamping device on the body. But of course he uses this cage to isolate the back from, muffling effect of his body. And he would much prefer the convenience of an internal style installation. I can see evidence of its previous placement on the surface of the top in the right light. There's only one little snag, and that is it was positioned directly over top of the brace on the inside, which means it can't go back in exactly the same location. You're going to have to move it about 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch or so, over towards the F-hole, I think. And of course, positioning is going to be a bit of a trick. We have to make some kind of probe so that we can hold it in the right spot and pull up so that it sticks. And I crafted this little C-shaped device here, which I can put through the eye of the F-hole. And being C-shaped, it'll let me line things up and make sure that the pickup ends up where I want it to be, rather than, down here somewhere. I've projected a line to its appropriate location. Looking at the pickup itself, I cleaned the putty off of it. This is going to be too long for my purposes. I have to shorten this down a little bit. I want enough that I can pull it through the hole, obviously, so I can attach it to the clampy deal. But it's still going to be about 3 or 4 inches too long. So let's snip it off somewhere around here and then reattach that to the jack. There's a tiny little resistor in there. Some kind of treble bleed. Let's see if we can maintain that. Hopefully it doesn't burn out on us. They're using, I think, lead-free high-temperature solder too. I got the wires reinstalled. Put the cap back on. I'll pull out the old end pin using the soft jaw pliers. I need to enlarge the hole, so I'll start off with a stepped bit and then finish that up with successive twist drills. I have this little hook tool that I use to measure from the inside surface of the end block to the outside. I can use that to extrapolate where the nut should start off. I've got this piece of wire which I'll thread through and get the jack into position. This can be kind of fiddly because there are a couple of washers on there as well. I'll do up the hardware on the outside. They've supplied some of this VBH adhesive, which is I think it's a 3M product that's got foam. And we'll stick that on the contact. I've cleaned the surface well of all the goo that was previously on there. And I've also cleaned the surface on the top as well in this area. Boy, this was fiddly work, and the positioning device didn't really function all that well. Man, this is a rough one. Not for beginners. Probably best left to the professional. Let's even put a little color on that ding there. Tighten up the truss rod a little bit. Okay, all set up and ready to go. Little neck adjustment did some good things. You know, even though the action doesn't change, if you've got too much relief in the neck, you definitely end up feeling it. You know, it registers. So that was good. The pickup works fine. I don't have a system that's going to give it, you know, a really good run through. Sean's got nice EQ and everything and a much better amp. But I will say that unamplified, this is definitely one of the nicest mandolins I've ever had my hands on. It's really kind of a revelation when you get a good one. It's like, oh, yes, that's what they're talking about. When they, you know, it's so responsive. Very satisfying. Hard to put down. Yeah, I know. This is a Tampura, which is an Indian drone instrument, a cousin to the sitar, you might say, used in various forms of classical music from the Indian subcontinent. There are a number of different sizes and tunings. It's used to form a sonic base upon which ragas or other compositions are formed. I don't know if there's an adequate equivalent in Western music. You know, you might say a rhythm section maybe, but it's not. It's the mood setter, the underpinning. It brings the vibe. You don't fret this one. You simply play open strings in a repetitive pattern. It's got the characteristic buzzy, blooming sound provided by this wide-topped, gently curving bridge, so that when the string is plucked, it beats rhythmically against a point on the bridge that's farther up from the place where it takes off. And depending on the force used, the string's amplitude will change the point at which it's beating. As the note decays and that string path gets smaller and smaller, that point moves back. And there's some tuning that can be done using these little pieces of cotton thread to act as sort of a stop. You know, it produces a big spectrum of overtones. There's some beads at the back here which act as micro tuners. Overtones and the harmonic series are a very important part of Indian music. They take it seriously. And because they're paying attention to it, they're more attuned than your average Western listener. So if you ever get a chance to watch an Indian combo tune up before performance, it's a real trip, because they're not just tuning to a note specifically, they're also focusing on tuning the overtones of the instruments to each other. And they work really hard to get it right before they start playing. All I can say is try not to drop a gourd-based instrument. These are made of either teak or a red cedar-like wood called tun. The neck, which is called a dundee, it's hollow. They're very light in proportion to their size. And it's attached to this resonating chamber called a tumba. It's made from a gourd. It's very much like a pumpkin, although it's actually deadly poison if you try to make it into a pie, so don't do that. The premier instruments are built in a place called Mirage. There's this wooden soundboard called a tabli, and there's usually, you know, some decorative inlay work with engraved plastic or bone. Really quite lovely. And that's about all I know. I'm not an expert, and there's not a whole lot of info available on repairing these things in English, and apparently there are very few people in Canada who specialize in repairing them. I'm basically unqualified, but I said I'd give it a shot. So there you can see the base of the gourd. And that's not good. I'm lucky in that this actually, number one, it's still attached to close to the rim, and it wants to go back pretty close to where it came from. So I think I'm going to use epoxy on this and get a bunch in there and sort of tape it back into place. My worry is that I might have to take off the soundboard, which I don't want to do, because there's this decorative binding which is made of plastic again, and it's adhered to the surface in a way that, yeah, you know, opening up something I don't know how to put back together. I mean, I could fake it, but I really don't want to. And there might be some little rattles left in here when I'm done, but you know, these things are not shaken while they're being played. So that's what I'm up against. So I decided to check myself prior to wrecking myself. And rather than epoxy, I'm going to go with just standard tight bond. Because as far as I can see, it's not under very much tension. And it fits together so well that it just seems to make sense. I'm going to use a generous amount of it, of course, figuring that the wall of this stuff is pretty porous. It's going to want to soak up a lot. And I'll probably come back afterwards and use some thin super glue as well, just to sort of reinforce the joint. But because this piece here really wants to push inward rather than out, I don't think it really needs interior reinforcement. The glue will hold it. It's so light too. The thing is, if it ever gets hit or dropped or otherwise abused, it's going to break again. You know, it has a kind of eggshell structural quality to it. You know, when everything's in one piece, it kind of hangs together nicely until you manage to shatter it. Cleanup will be much easier with the tight bond. I don't think there's a practical way of clamping something like this. I could maybe wrap surgical tubing or string around it or something, but with that I think you're going to deform portions of it that aren't under the direct need of clamping, and it's going to sort of misshape the whole bowl. As it is, it seems to be going right back into place without too much of an issue. Glue is dried. I'll do a little sanding just on the edges. Clean things up a little bit. And I'll pad on some shellac to mimic the rest of the surface. Okay, tuning one of these things. First of all, you should know that there are masculine and feminine versions of the instrument. It relates to the size of the body and the length of the neck, the string length, basically. And that has to do with the accompaniment of male or female voices originally. This would be the feminine one, and there are different tunings depending on, how they're set up. In this case, for the feminine one, we'd have the interior strings. The two middle ones would be the same pitch. And from what I can deduce, this was tuned in A when it came to me. So those are the same. The one that's on the left-hand side, the one that's closest to me, would be an octave down. And the one that's on the far side here, away from me, would be the perfect fifth. So these are A, that would be E. So you end up with... Now then, it also gets a bit more complex because we have these little pieces of thread underneath the strings providing the break-off point. And there is an art and science to using this to produce that sustained droney buzz. In order to dial that in, people use threads of different diameters. There seems to be an awful lot of thread on here versus ones I've seen online. So what happens is you strike the note and then pull the thread back to a point where you start to get the buzz, and you can dial it in from there forwards and backwards till it sounds right. You want a long sustained buzz that doesn't abruptly leave. It should sort of fade out. Wow. I don't know if you can hear it. It's almost like the reverberation in a didgeridoo. You can hear the harmonic series break up as it goes along, That's pretty cool. I noticed there's one little area of binding that was coming loose here, so I've decided to glue that down while we're at it. To play this thing, ordinarily they're held upright. It's a vertical kind of instrument. I, of course, can't do that here in this shop, having the lowest shop ceiling in the world. But to play it, basically, it's a drone. It's plucked somewhere around a third of the string length away from the nut. And, if you look up Ravi Shankar playing at the Monterey Pop Festival, that's a fantastic performance. Or any other classical Indian ensemble, you're going to find someone sitting off to the side with one of these things, and throughout the entire performance, that's all they're going to do. But it's a very important job, just playing these notes. Anyway, that's all I know about the Tampura. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next week.